Hello, good morning, everyone, and welcome back to this webinar series. This is a webinar series on a priori technology. This is Enrico Boeso from Enginesoft Italy, and the webinar series is called Getting Visibility into Cost, Carbon and Manufacturability Earlier in the Design for Best-in-Class Products. This is today we are here for the second part of this webinar series. And the topic of today is data-driven decision-making for profitable and sustainable products. Unlock the value in your digital twin. And today with us, there's Mark Raxton from A Priori Technology. Thank you, Mark, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
And I want to remind to all the attendees that at the end of this presentation done by Mark, there will be a Q&A session. So if you want to ask some questions, feel free to write down them in the Q&A session of the webinar and the Zoom platform interface. So, Mark, please, the webinar is yours, and you can start with your presentation. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Enrico. Okay, so hopefully you can all see my screen now.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks.
Excellent. So today's session, as Enrico said, is data-driven decision-making for a profitable and sustainable product. And the focus is really going to be around sourcing and sustainable sourcing. So my name is Mark Rushton. I've been with A Priori for the last 2 years, but before that, I've been in design engineering and sustainability for around 2 decades now, all in product development, so around 3D CAD and also additive manufacturing. Started out as a design engineer and then moved into the software. I've been at 2 of the big 4 CAD software vendors, being product director for one of the most well-known 3D CAD software tools before joining A Priori. And A Priori, we're really here to help our customers, who are all discrete manufacturers, to create great products faster by empowering them to do more with every resource spent designing and manufacturing their products, whilst also minimizing the environmental impact. And we do that by giving insights that you can't get any other way into what a product should cost directly from the 3D CAD model, but also checking the manufacturability and also giving a calculation of the embodied carbon that goes into that design. And we've got thousands of people at the world's leading manufacturers relying on A Priori to bring their products to market profitably and without delays, reducing risks and increasing profit margins. Some of our customers, the likes of Danfoss, they've initiated a corporate-wide cost-down initiative, and they regularly save 20 to 30% on new product introduction programs on average. Alstom Story, particularly relevant for today, they've implemented their own zero RFQ process using A Priori as the tool behind it. And essentially, it means that they don't need to send out RFQs to their suppliers and then wait for a response. Using A Priori, they've agreed what prices everything should be, what the labor rates are, what the material prices are. A Priori calculates the cost. The suppliers have agreed that cost in advance, and so the time saving is massive, but they've also saved around 40% of their part costs as well. So huge time saving by introducing that program. And many other customers as well, very large household names when it comes to manufacturing. Our head office is just outside Boston in the US, in Massachusetts. Company's been around for about 20 years with very consistent, compelling growth, and we have a lot of experience in manufacturing. As a company, we're really focused on the priorities that are the same as in industrial manufacturing. So for the last couple of years, margin pressure and inflation have been a cause for concern. That's definitely an area that we can help. Supply chain risk and supply chain disruption is also an area. If we're looking at new suppliers, where to look and make sure you're getting paying a fair price for those items that you're getting from suppliers. Something that's been around for at least the last 15 years is a labour and skills gap, and that's an area we can help, particularly when it comes to manufacturability. With an ageing engineering and manufacturing workforce, we're going to lose a lot of that expertise over the next few years, and replacing that expertise around manufacturability is an area that we can fill any gaps. And then more recently, again, the last couple of years, sustainability action has become critical. It's not just a nice to have, it's really critical to stay in business, reducing risk and attracting customers is something you need to have. So the way we help is really by unlocking the value in your digital twin. So most companies have done a pretty good job of investments around the digital product twin, and that tends to be the main focus. But where we come in is actually give you a digital twin of the manufacturing process. So using our AI engine, we'll take the 3D CAD model and optimize the manufacturing process and tell you how it should be done and all the costs and associated energy use and the equivalent carbon emissions that come with it, but also checking for manufacturability. And the way we do that is by running through a digital twin of the factory or the manufacturing facility. So whether it's your suppliers or your own manufacturing facility, you can make sure the machinery and equipment is the same, and therefore we can check the best way to manufacture it through that equipment and give you how long it takes and all of the associated costs as well. That unlocks all of the insights around cost, manufacturability, and carbon equivalent emissions. So that's how we do it. So today's session is all around sourcing and sustainability. So that's what we're going to look at first of all. So why is sustainable sourcing important? Then we're going to take a quick look at some of the regulations that are kind of enforcing us to do things more sustainably, and a little bit on carbon accounting. And then I've got a series of case studies. So we've identified within our customers, from talking to customers and prospective customers, we've identified 4 levels of maturity when it comes to product sustainability. So we can talk through that and then run through some case studies of real life examples of how a priori can be used or has been used to reduce the carbon and cost of different designs. And then we'll summarize at the end. So that'll be the next 30 minutes or so. That's what we're going to be taking a look at. So sustainability is really the goal or the initiative to tackle a global problem. You know, the race is on to limit global warming to prevent the worst effects of climate change. The Paris Agreement had the world's governments committed to limit global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees centigrade. And in recent news, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, states the world is already 1.1 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels because of more than a century of burning fossil fuels, resulting in more frequent and more intense extreme weather events. So to avoid catastrophic impacts of climate change, we've got to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. We've got to get them to net zero by 2050. And manufacturing plays a significant role in actually reducing and helping the problem or reducing the problem. But up to now, it's been a large contributor to the problem, with something like 20% of the world's total energy, total emissions, and 54% of the world's energy consumption are from manufacturing. So it's really a race against time. Lots of people have made promises, but it's really now time to take action, and that's something that we can help with. So we outlined the global problem facing the planet and the role that manufacturing plays. So to tackle these issues, we're seeing more and more focus placed on the role of supply chain. So why should you focus on your supply chain? Well, according to the US Environmental Protection Agency, up to 92% of emissions on average can be allocated to the supply chain. The Carbon Disclosure Project estimate is that supply chain emissions are 11.4 times larger than the actual operation emissions of a company. So these obviously vary from business to business, but I think it's safe to say that supply chain emissions will make up the majority of emissions in most manufacturing businesses. A recent survey of OEMs and suppliers conducted by us and Industry Week resulted in 81% of respondents cited sustainable sourcing as extremely or very important to their business. So again, this is only expected to increase with pressures from customers, downstream suppliers, and from regulations. And then finally, we're seeing a change in end consumer or end user habits, with a report from The Economist detailing that 85% of consumers will buy from a company with a reputation for sustainability if prices were equal. So that change in consumer habits is only expected to increase as well. So what are the challenges when it comes to sustainable sourcing? Well, these are some of the biggest pain points that we're hear from customers and prospective customers and from the industry in general. So one of the biggest challenges when trying to sustainably source is really the lack of knowledge and understanding of sustainability within the procurement process, and the lack of data that's available. So we're regularly hearing that customers stating that their procurement team can understand the financial impact in sourcing decisions, but have trouble understanding the impacts and risks when it comes to exposure of carbon on the business performance. So making the selection of suppliers much more uncertain. Another common challenge is increased costs. Sustainable sourcing often requires significant investments in technology, processes, and training, and these costs can be difficult to justify in the short term. However, while sustainable sourcing might be more expensive initially, it can lead to long-term cost savings through reduced waste, increased efficiency, and cost avoidance by avoiding the cost of non-compliance for certain regulations. And most people believe that any gap between low-cost procurement and sustainability is closing. So if not all upfront investment will be recovered directly or indirectly. Another difficulty when looking to source more sustainably can be a lack of transparency within your supply chains. And this can arise due to a product having multiple different suppliers for materials or manufacturing parts within the same product, meaning that you can be dealing with hundreds or thousands of suppliers that require large amounts of data. A difficulty can also arise from lack of alignment in responsibility across supply chains in parts of the world that don't have strict carbon targets and goals. So making transparency and ensuring those suppliers have proven and documented environmental data difficult. And some suppliers are just slower to understand the importance of sustainability. If it's a smaller company or in a region of the world that hasn't placed much importance on sustainability, that's going to be difficult as well. When it comes to regulations and reporting pressures, for a company to reach carbon neutrality, indirect emissions have got to be considered. So it's not enough just to consider your direct emissions and energy consumption. So as a result, regulations and reporting frameworks are starting to ask and mandate companies to report on their indirect emissions. So the importance of compliance to these reporting requirements and hitting indirect emissions targets is only set to increase. So we're going to cover some examples of regulations and reporting that's either active or coming very soon. So, however, before we do that, it's important to discuss carbon accounting. So one of the most commonly used is for carbon kind of frameworks for carbon emissions is the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, and this has been widely accepted as a standard for carbon accountancy. So as a result, the emissions are scoped into different categories. So scopes 1, 2, and 3. And what they are, so carbon emissions are organized into these 3 scopes. Scope 1 is anything directly owned by the reporting company. So these are direct emissions as an entity that you're directly responsible for. So here's an example: if you've got any furnaces or boilers on site that are burning gas, any of the emissions resulting as a result of those is scope 1. Any company-owned vehicles as well, and any emissions directly coming from the offices as well are all part of scope 1. When it comes to scope 2, these are indirect emissions, but they are from purchased energy. So if you're buying electricity, it's the associated emissions from the generation of that electricity. So that's scope 2. So purchased electricity is the most common example for that. Then scope 3 is really anything else. So it's anything indirect, upstream and downstream activities of your organization, including employees commuting to the office and things like that. A good example of this when focusing on supply chain are essentially all the purchased goods and services. So if you outsource any manufacturing or buy in material, any associated emissions from that, from the raw material extraction and refinement is all part of that scope 3. So the first 2 scopes are relatively easy for an organization to understand and monitor because you've got direct control over them, you've got direct access to be able to measure it, even from like a spend-based approach, but you've got a pretty good idea of the consumption there. But when it comes to scope 3, the onus is really being on the supply chain to provide significant amount of that data. So it's easier to say that than to actually do it. So given these definitions, when we're focused on sourcing, we're really concerned about scope 3 emissions and any regulations that have got scope 3 reporting requirements. So some of the regulations for the EU, where I'm guessing most of today's audience are based. So let's take a look at some of those. So when it comes to regulatory and reporting pressure, one of the key challenges are around the kind of principles of carbon accountancy. So we're going to cover some examples of regulations and reporting standards that are either in place or coming soon. This reporting landscape is really rapidly changing, but the key takeaway should be that reporting on your environmental impact is going to become very important, and you need to be ready for it. So we'll start by focusing on the EU. It's the most mature and it's going to be the most relevant to today's audience. So the first regulation is the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. This is the standard by which nearly 50,000 EU companies will report their climate and environmental impact. And that actually started at the beginning of this year, 2024. This regulation will apply to non-EU companies as well if you've got a substantial activity in the EU, including a physical presence. And the CSRD requires double materiality, which basically means that materials will have to disclose not only the risks they face from from a changing climate, but also the impacts that they may cause to the climate and to society. Closely linked regulation is the SFRD, or the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation. This focused on creating financial sector transparency for sustainable investment products. Also helps to prevent greenwashing and to increase transparency around sustainability claims made by the financial sector participants. Both of these are kind of complementary regulations to one another, focused on enhancing transparency and accountability. So while CSRD requires large corporations to compare their sustainability performance with the EU taxonomy, SFRD mandates financial market entities to disclose how their product line aligns with the same taxonomy. Then the final example here is it's not just reporting standard, but it'll actually apply a tariff. So it kind of a tax on the import of goods from outside the EU for certain categories of materials. So the EU's Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, or CBAM, is really a landmark tool to put a fair price on the carbon emitted during the production of carbon-intensive goods that are entering the EU. And that's really to encourage cleaner industrial production in non-EU countries. Many EU importers will, for the first time, be charged a carbon price for their Scope 3 emissions. This is going to be rolled out to limited commodities, so iron, steel, aluminium, among others. They're the ones that can affect manufacturing the most. But it's set to expand as CBAM enters full force. So this would mean that goods imported into the EU from the US or any country outside of the EU would be subject to this carbon tax based on the amount of carbon that's actually in those materials and those finished goods that are coming into the EU. Just a quick look at some of the things outside of the US as well, outside of the EU, sorry. So in the US, there's a series of regulations and reporting. I'm not going to dwell on these too much, but we've got the climate-related disclosure, which is currently proposed by the SEC. We've got the International Sustainability Standards Board, and also the Science Based Targets Initiative, which is a voluntary scheme to sign up to. So one key consideration when understanding the challenges and opportunities is really trying to quantify the cost of carbon. So if you can measure how much carbon is in a product, what does a kilogram of or a ton of carbon equivalent emissions really mean for your business? So one option is to assign an internal carbon price. And this is a really strategic way to kind of carry on doing business as normal, but also increase your sustainability. So if you've got a price for carbon, you can just consider it the same as you would a cost for anything else. You're going to try and avoid it. You're going to want as accurate data to measure it as possible. But you're building in some sustainability decision making into your sourcing decisions, or any decision, in fact. A CDP project, a CDP report, a CDP is the Carbon Disclosure Project, detailed that nearly half of the top 500 companies by market share are using the concept of an internal carbon price in today's business. So what are the key benefits? Well, you can directly link emissions to financial decisions. So you're not having to compare the two and try and make arbitrary comparisons. It's a really nice way to do it. Just a single metric of a currency, euros, pounds, dollars, whatever it is, you can do that with one metric. And so for sourcing, it can incorporate the risk of carbon cost exposure, so from the likes of CBAM or carbon taxes or tariffs, or if you just want to choose more sustainable, greener suppliers, it's a really good way to link the two. And it's a great internal tool as well to incentivize low carbon sourcing and operations. If you've got that price, that cost associated with carbon, it just has so many knock-on effects to improve your sustainability. So there's lots of different ways to set an ICP, and we've got a couple of examples that we're going to go through. But lots of businesses are taking multiple factors into determining their ICP, their internal carbon price, which is right for their business. So yeah, there's some of the benefits that we just ran through as well. And it also drives a lot of other things as well. So if you have an internal carbon price, maybe it increases over time as well. So you can naturally become more sustainable. But it also means that you're going to look at your data more closely, like you would any financial reporting. You want it to be as accurate as possible, so that your decisions are as accurate as well. So as I mentioned at the start, from talking to customers and looking at industry, when it comes to product sustainability, there's really 4 levels that companies are at in terms of maturity. So the first one is really to establish a baseline. Without that baseline of product sustainability, you've really got nothing to compare it to. So any improvements or regressions are going to be very difficult to quantify. So setting a baseline is really the most important step. Then from there, the next stage that we've identified is because of the impact of supply chain, companies really look to improve their sourcing. Can we choose a greener supplier, a lower carbon supplier? Can we work with them to optimize their processes? Can we choose a supplier that uses 100% renewable energy, one with more recycled content available to them, things like that? They're not having to change the design necessarily. They can just look to change their suppliers and make some improvements around sustainability. Then beyond that, it's really taking existing products and trying to make them more sustainable with kind of a sustainable cost engineering or VAVE kind of approach, or value engineering, and looking at how they can change an existing design based on the materials or maybe the processes without changing the design too much to improve the sustainability. And then the final stage, really when everything else is in place, you can start to make sustainable design decisions. So really taking everything into account right from the word go, how can I design this product to be sustainable right from the beginning? So they're the 4 levels. So today we're going to really focus on creating a baseline and how you can use a priori to help with sustainable sourcing. So these are our examples. So we're going to take this sheet metal bracket, it's a steel bracket, and we want to set a baseline using a priori. So all we need to do is choose, once we've got our 3D CAD model, all we have to do is tell a priori where our digital factory location is, and that's going to determine the local energy mix. So for this one, we're going to say it's manufactured in South Mexico, using AISI 1020 cold steel, with an annual volume of around 85,000 of these brackets, and we're going to be in production for 5 years. So that's all we really need to use a priori to get our baseline. So from that, we can determine the cost of 60 cents. Our rough mass, so our rough mass is how much sheet metal we actually need to buy in order to manufacture this. So we calculate how well it's nested, we'll look at the waste material that's not used, and then the finished mass we calculate as well from that CAD model. And from that, from a simulation which takes a few seconds to a minute to run through for a part like this, it gives us our results of our carbon. So we've got 346 grams of carbon equivalent emissions from the material and the processes that's gone into this steel bracket. So we can equate that to an annual carbon of around 29 tonnes. So then if we look further, we can use a priori to determine the same level of production, the same design, the same material, but in different locations around the world. So built into our solution, we've got different digital factories around the world, which can be customized to suit your own suppliers. But based on their electricity mix in those different countries, we can start to get results. And based on their regional labour rates, they're going to have a different cost and a different carbon figure. So very quickly, we can assess where in the world is best for this sheet metal bracket. So we've got the fully burdened cost in the darker colour, and the lighter bluey colour is the carbon equivalent emissions. So we can see we've stacked the two together, and it's quite hard to actually get a sense of which one is the best because we haven't got the same units. We've got a carbon in kilograms in blue, and we've got dollars in the kind of grey blue colour. So we can't really look for the lowest column because the carbon might be higher or the cost might be higher in a different place. So that's where the internal carbon price comes in. What that means is we can group the two together and make a much better decision with everything in the same units. So this is our current supplier in Southwest Mexico. And if we look to other regions, we can see that Hungary and Slovakia potentially give us a better cost and carbon mix, with both columns being lower. So if we implement an internal carbon price to that, we can actually plot that next to the cost figure. So if we add the carbon price to the fully burdened cost, we get this extra column with the cost due to carbon. So now the lowest column really is our lowest cost and carbon together. And that, so compared to our current supply location in Mexico, actually comes out with the Czech Republic being the best option. So not the two options of Hungary and Slovakia we had before, but for this design, a factory in the Czech Republic takes into account that internal carbon price due to the emissions. So you can see much easier to decide by implementing that carbon price, using a priori to give you all of that data directly from the 3D CAD model. And then you can go deeper with it. So you can start to use a priori more strategically. And that can also help. So the other choice you might have in a procurement or a sourcing stage is what kind of batch sizing do you want to use? And that's going to affect the cost as well. And that's something that we can plot very quickly and easily. By simulating those scenarios, we can quickly assess the most efficient batch sizing, most economic for optimal cost, considering any information that we've got, any available, such as logistics and storage costs. So that means we can very quickly identify the kind of overall cost and what makes sense from a batch size perspective. So you can see where the storage costs start to increase beyond the batch size. So once the batch size gets too high, our storage costs go up. So very quickly we can see where the optimal batch size is. So when it comes to carbon cost on economic batch sizing, we can bake that in as well. So if we plot that on the same chart, we can see if we have the storage cost including CO2, then we get a different perspective as well. So it actually changes our optimum batch size to a little bit smaller than what we had originally. So there's a lot more we can do as well. Using the analytics in a priori, we can start to look at which materials we are potentially at risk of short supply. We can look at what we're buying. We can look at which machines are being used the most, and where we might have some unused capacity. And the way we do all of that is importing a 3D CAD file, selecting a digital factory from a drop-down list, and that's all we really need to give you insights that you can review. And then based on your role and responsibility, you can choose to take action. And that's around cost, sustainability, and manufacturability. And that's really going to lead to best-in-class products. And that's what our customers rely on us for. So now I'm just going to run a short video just so you can see that in action. And I think I just need to share some sound as well. So let me add sound. There we go. So here's a short video.
If you are looking to join the rapidly expanding number of leading manufacturers using a priori to improve their product profitability, sustainability, and manufacturability, you start by simply uploading your 3D CAD model into the Manufacturing Insights platform. After choosing from a list of manufacturing process groups, a digital factory, and an annual volume for production, you are ready to get insights into cost, carbon, and DFM. In seconds after a full manufacturing simulation, we get design guidance based on a combination of best practices and the specific capabilities of manufacturing facilities. This allows the design to be right the first time, accelerating your time to market, and reducing the back and forth so often required with suppliers. We can also dive deeper and look at the time and cost of each operation, as well as a full breakdown of fully burdened cost, which can be used to drive further reductions during design or leveraged for fact-based negotiations downstream. We can then start to make data-driven decisions earlier in design by comparing different scenarios, altering the design, the material, the manufacturing process, or the chosen supplier or region. We can then take this to the next level of automation by leveraging a priori's bulk analysis and upload a complete project of 3D CAD assemblies. Or go fully automated and integrate manufacturing insights into your PLM system. Everything evaluated on the Manufacturing Insights platform can be viewed from a much higher level too. Using the inbuilt analytics, we can build dashboards and reports to help us identify opportunities for innovation, applying precious resources on the most impactful areas, reducing risks and focusing efforts. Or use the data for strategic sourcing decisions. On top of all that, scenarios can be shared with key project stakeholders, enabling in-context collaboration with full traceability. Removing the need to schedule time for experts to review designs, getting more profitable, sustainable, manufacturable designs to market faster than ever before.
So that gives you a pretty good idea of how it all works, and it is a platform, so you can use it right throughout the product development cycle. So design engineers can use it, cost engineers or value engineers or manufacturing engineers can use it to refine the manufacturing process further. Program managers can look at a higher level and have a look at some project analytics. But we've also got collaboration built in, so any stakeholder from any phase of the process can interact with different scenarios and input into design and sourcing decisions. And obviously today's all about sourcing. We can leverage everything that's been done before by value engineers and design engineers when it comes to sourcing decisions. A lot of our customers start with a priori for sourcing and fact-based negotiations around cost, but obviously carbon is the next thing on their priority list. And we have a series of applications all linked through the platform to suit each different persona when it comes to product development and sourcing. So with a priori, you can really overcome a lot of sustainable sourcing challenges. You can overcome lack of knowledge and insights by looking at the different carbon drivers across multiple regions at the click of a button. Bottom-up detailed estimate on all manufacturing contributions to part and product carbon and cost. You could also limit increased costs, so automation and speed of assessment, reducing demand on resources, reduced recruitment and training costs, as a priori provides those insights and knowledge to the user. And you can improve supply chain engagement. A priori takes the burden away from suppliers with secondary information embedded into the software. So this provides the ability to focus effort on high carbon suppliers to improve focus, transparency, and as a result, engagement. And you're going to be much more ready for regulations and reporting. We've got very clear and reportable calculations on carbon assessments built in. A lot of customers report how auditable the calculations from a priori are. So that summarizes today's session on sustainable sourcing. Does anybody have any questions at all? Just while you're typing those questions in, we do have one more webinar next week on July 3rd. I've just put a QR code in there so you can link straight to the registration page if that makes it easier for you. Otherwise, check out the EngineSoft events page.
Thank you, Mark. We are waiting for questions. So if there are any questions, you can write down them on the Q&A session of the webinar interface. And to be honest, I am impressed by this presentation because I think that the insight that you can obtain using this software are great, and you cannot compare this type of solution with anything else around the world. It is. I am really impressed. It is amazing what you can do in a very simple way with this solution.
Thanks, Enrico. Yeah, it's really proud to work for a priori. It's a really kind of unique solution, and like you said, you can't get these kind of insights from any other method really. To compare cost and carbon is critical, I think, for businesses, and yeah, to do it in just a couple of clicks really makes life very easy.
That's great. And in a world where the sustainability is becoming more and more important, I think that also in the next future, this should be more important. This type of insight to be done.
Yeah, very much. And I think having an internal carbon price, once a company's decided on that, whether it's €100 per ton of carbon or 150 or 200, as soon as you've got that price, you're going to want the most accurate, the most visibility into your carbon emissions. So just by doing that, it gives you a natural incentive, and one that anybody can kind of understand and get behind. And that's what all of our sustainability customers have done. They've put in their carbon price into a priori. So they're calculating costs, product should cost with a priori, and then having that carbon figure as another euro or dollar figure, it just naturally leads them down that path of improving sustainability and decarbonisation.
Thanks, Mark. No question coming, so we can close this webinar for today. And remember to participate to the next webinar of this series, the 3rd of July. And if you want to participate also to the last webinar, remember that you need to subscribe in the EngineSoft web page to this last events. So Thanks for joining us today. Thank you, Marco, for your amazing presentation. See you next week.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Enrico. See you next week.
Bye. Thanks.